Mrs. Bay sensed something unusual about her husband's behavior. He often complained about their home internet, and on one occasion, after they'd already left their apartment, he insisted on going back to check for any signs of tampering. He recounted an odd encounter at a local Burger King where the police officer asked him if he frequented that particular location. There was also an incident where they heard water running in the upstairs apartment, but no one answered when they knocked on the door. Sometimes he joked about getting captured by an AI drone, watching his favorite movie The Matrix on repeat. To Mrs. Bay, he seemed like a harmless quirk. Her husband was just a lovable nerd. But then everything changed. On May the 10th, 2021, as Mrs. Bay finished cooking lunch, the doorbell rang. Her husband answered, and as the door swung open, a team of police officers surged inside and took him into custody. They seized his computer and other belongings as evidence. For the next 2 years, Mrs. Bay was left in the dark. The police wouldn't disclose any information, as if it were a national secret. She couldn't fathom what her husband, a quiet, intellectual man, could have done to warrant such treatment. Then came to her moment of realization. Her husband was none other than the elusive blogger ProgramThink. His real name is Ruan Xiaohuan. He was charged with inciting subversion of state power and sentenced to 7 years in prison. ProgramThink had been an internet mystery since 2009. Initially, he blogged about computer science and software development. In that same year, as the Chinese government intensified its crackdown on the internet freedoms, ProgramThink expanded his focus, stating, "I don't want to stay silent or avoid these issues." From then on, he wrote about politics, history, and current events, all topics considered taboo in China. His popularity grew as he taught readers how to climb the wall, a term for bypassing China's internet firewall to access unrestricted sites like Google or YouTube. His blog became a touchstone for independent thoughts, offering insights and opinions rarely encountered in mainstream Chinese media. In 2016, he launched a GitHub project mapping relationships among China's ruling families using public sources, exposing their control over wealth and power. The Cybersecurity Association of China pressed GitHub to remove that project, but it stayed online. In 2019, on his blog's 10th anniversary, he published a post titled, "Why the Government Can't Catch Me, a Decade of Anti-CCP Cybersecurity." Some urged him to leave China, but he replied, "If everyone who resists leaves, they win. I choose to stay in this bizarre empire. Fighting the party is fun." ProgramThink taught his followers not just how to code, but how to think critically. He debunked government propaganda and enlightened thousands. Yet his wife, his closest confidant, was not among them. Working in the middle management for a foreign firm in Shanghai, Mrs. Bay was proud of her steady, successful career. The couple had met in college, where Rand's passion for computer science led him to work with several top cybersecurity firms, rising to the rank of CTO and even serving as a chief engineer for Beijing Olympic Information Security Team in 2008. But by 2012, he'd left the corporate world to focus on open source software, reading, and writing. According to Mrs. Bay, he often encouraged her to pursue intellectual growth, urging her to find her passion so they could have deeper conversations. He disliked her endless social media scroll, pushing her instead to read more books. When she pressed him on his mysterious study hours, he brushed it off as programming stuff that she wouldn't understand. After his arrest, police remained tight-lipped with Mrs. Bay. Initially angry at being left in the dark, she didn't even know where to begin her search for answers. The trial was postponed multiple times until nearly 2 years later. She was abruptly informed that it would commence in 3 days. Seeing him again for the first time in 2 years, with gray hair she barely recognized, her anger faded. The court's flimsy verdict, devoid of any mention of his blog, condemned him to 7 years in prison. Desperate for answers, she finally bypassed China's internet control to access his blogs. Instantly, she knew this was her husband. His voice unmistakable in the blend of wit, confidence, and even defiance. In one post, he taunted the police, daring them to try harder to catch him. Though well aware that Chinese security forces were tracking him, he trusted in his knowledge and security practice. Rand had written about the risk of remaining anonymous, reasoning that the larger his following, the greater his protection. Some human rights activists in China, lacking visibility, had died under suspicious circumstances. Following his arrest, Mrs. Bay took to Twitter for the first time to rally support, saying, "My only goal is to keep him alive. Under the circumstances, I can't expect much more." She now lived cautiously, using loud music to cover her conversation during some interviews, fearing surveillance devices in her apartment. After her husband's arrest, she began hearing sounds from the vacant upstairs unit, suspecting her neighbors were undercover cops. I know, this sounds like straight out of a movie script, but this is her reality, and China's reality. A digital totalitarianism that leaves no space for freedom. Heroes like ProgramThink fight a noble war in obscurity. Most Chinese citizens will never hear of him, his words erased from the nation's censored internet. His blog remains online, a testament to his security expertise, still inaccessible to the authorities. But I cannot simply sit idly by and watch voices like his are silenced. I can't do much, but any media coverage will help, and you can help as well.